Most of us, if not all of us, we have complicated relationships with our Father. Some things still are not resolved. Some things may never get resolved until we get to heaven. That's just the way life is. I think that I've told a number of you in one of our first trainings. Didn't I tell you the story about my mother? I did. I want to tell you the story about my father. My father was a good man. He was born in New York, right on the edge of the city where it became country. He was born in 1923, so when he died a few years ago, he was 93 years old. His father, whom I never met, was a raging alcoholic. When my father was in the middle of secondary school, he needed to drop out of school and get a job so he could help his mother feed him and her and his 5 siblings. 4 siblings? I've forgotten. Then World War II came along. He joined the Army and he ended up in the South Pacific. He was a cook for his company. When the war ended, he was stationed in California. That's where he met my mother. She was not from California or New York. She was from Minnesota. They met in a church gathering. They got married, and then they moved up to Portland, Oregon, where I was born. They got married and had 3 children. My father took the money that the government gave him for schooling, which they gave to every soldier from World War II. And he went to Bible college. He worked half the day, and he went to school half the day. It took him 5 years to get through a 3-year program. My father was not a preacher. He was not a teacher. I never heard him preach a sermon or teach a Sunday school lesson. But God gave him the gift of hospitality. And he used that gift in his lifetime alongside my mother to minister to hundreds, no, thousands of international students who had come to Portland to university to go to college. Many of them were Nigerian, but they were from all over the world: Chinese, Indians, South Americans, Europeans, Africans. My mother died 20 years ago. My father died, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. Even when he was 91 years old, he was still going 1 or 2 nights a week down to the university downtown to hang out with international students, visit them. He would bring a large bag full of cookies that other people had made, or he'd buy them at the store. And he'd put them in small little plastic bags and go from room to room, visiting 20 or 30 students an evening. Hundreds of students at that university knew him not by his real name, but by his name, Papa. I remember meeting someone in my real estate business in one of the suburbs where I was working. One day, I'd never met these people. I met them. I was helping them to buy a house. They were Chinese. I could tell that they'd been in the United States for maybe 5 or 10 years. So I asked them, "Where did you go to school?" And they said, "Oh, we went to Portland State University." I said, "Oh, well then you probably knew my father." "Who's your father?" "Papa." "You're Papa's son?" Oh, they were amazed. They saw Jesus, they saw the love of Jesus through the friendship and hospitality and personal servanthood of my father. He was a good man, but he was not perfect. Remember, I told you he was the adult child of an alcoholic, and that affected him in a lot of ways. I never saw him drink, but it affected him emotionally, psychologically, relationally, and a lot of that was passed on to me and to my sons. He was a pretty good father, but because of his relationship with his father, he had no modeling of how to really be close to me as his son. He did the best he could. I respected him. I obeyed him. I appreciated him. I loved him. But there were parts of him that weren't connecting with me in my life. But he did the best he could. And he was a child of God and a servant of God. The problem was this. I just began to realize the last few years. I was so close to him because we lived in the same family. I grew up in his house. I was so close to him. I couldn't see until 10 or so years ago, until I was in my 60s, I couldn't see him accurately. I can't read this title. It's too close. It's still there. It's true, but I can't read it. Now I can read the title of the book. Sometimes it's that way with our parents. We are so close to them, we can't see the shape of their lives until we get old enough to back off and see that. We did one thing interesting with my father. I knew he was going to die. He had cancer for 5 years before he died. About 3 or 4 months before he died, while he was still able to get around, we decided to throw him a party. I say we and the staff at the International Student Ministry that he was still part of, the volunteers. Not the students. We couldn't fit several hundred students into one room, just the volunteers who had worked with him in that ministry over the years. So we called a party together in a large room at the church. 70 people showed up, some of them who had worked with him 30 or 40 years prior to that in that ministry. They showed up to honor him and appreciate the example that he'd given. I calculated, to my amazement, that even though he held a regular job, he volunteered in the church, he raised a family. During those years, since about 1955, he had spent an average of 2 hours a day, 365 days a year, in his ministry to international students for 62 years. I can't even bother to calculate how many hours that is. Can you imagine? He was faithful in the work that God had given him to do. Now, the story in our text this morning is about a Jewish father. Let me explain something to you that you may not know. I'll illustrate it this way. Let me talk about 2 kinds of animals. Dogs and pigs, okay? Now, remember, I'm a foreigner. I'm a Baturi. We grew up with different habits, different customs, different things that we did. One of the things I think we did differently was this. Many American families have a pet dog. How many of you have dogs in your household, in your compound? Anyone? Okay? But I understand very clearly that generally speaking, in West African society, dogs are not allowed in the house. Is that true? No. They're dirty animals. They're running around outside all the time, feeding on garbage, whatever. Well, due to various circumstances, we're able to have pet dogs. I had 4 children. One of my favorite photographs of my 4 children is this. It happened the day child number 4 was born. The 3 older children were sitting on the couch. They had just come home from school in the afternoon. When they came home from school, they discovered that their mother had given birth to number 4, a baby boy. They were so happy. They sat on the couch, and we took their picture. Oldest son, oldest daughter, who was holding the baby 1.5 hours old. Youngest daughter, and right beside them, sitting as proud as can be, was Laddie, our German Shepherd Collie mix, who had been part of our family for years. He was a wonderful, kind, gentle, protective dog to our children. They loved him. We all loved and enjoyed him. You see, that's something that would not happen here in Nigeria. You have different customs, different attitudes about dogs than we do. The same thing is true about the Jewish people, in a way. Jewish people, from the very beginning, won't have anything to do with pigs. Did you know that? When they have bacon, when they have eggs for breakfast, it's not bacon and eggs. Never. You can't go into a Jewish delicatessen and order a ham sandwich. They'll throw you out. They don't eat pork of any kind, ever. Pigs were the most disgusting, despicable animals to them. So in this story, when this young man leaves home, runs out of money, he gets hungry, he's so desperate, the only job he can find is working for a pig farmer. That's the worst possible thing he could have done, working for a pig farmer. And he was so desperately hungry. He even looked at the pig's food and said, "This is all I have to eat." Can you imagine that? Eating with the pigs? I can't. You probably can't either. That was the point of desperation that got his attention, that woke him up. What did he say? The home I left, there was always enough to eat, and it was good food. Delicious food, and good for me. What am I doing here? What have I done to my life? What choices have I made that has brought me to this place? And even though he had left his home in a spirit of rebellion and independence, he was now a broken man. And it was his hunger that brought his mind to the right place. The text says, when he came to himself, when he realized what he had done, that's when he turned back and he went to his father. He thought, look, I don't even deserve to be called his son anymore. I don't need to be a son to eat. If I can just work for him, he has a lot of servants, and his servants get good food to eat. That's what I'll do. I'll go to him and I'll say, "Look, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. What I did was horribly wrong. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. I don't deserve to be called your son anymore. I'm not expecting that you treat me like that. Treat me as one of your hired servants, one of your employees. That way I know I'll get something to eat." Wow. Now, let me point out something for those of us who are older and adults. What he did to his father was unconscionable. He came to his father and he said, "I don't want to wait until you're dead to get my inheritance. I want it now, while I'm young enough to enjoy it." Do you see how disrespectful that was? In effect, he's saying, I don't want you to be part of my life. I just wish you were dead. All I want is the money so I can enjoy myself. Would that go well in your village? It didn't go well in his village either. People would come up to the father when they found out what happened, and they said, "If this boy ever comes back, we'll tell you what we will do. We will start picking up rocks and we stone him to death. That's what we do to children like this." which explains something very interesting in the story. His father was an old man, and he did something that nobody would approve. You just didn't do that in Jewish society. What did he do? When he saw his son coming back, he got up off the chair on the front porch of the house, and he pulled up his robes so that he wouldn't trip and hurt himself. He pulled up his robes high enough so that he could run, so that he could sprint down the driveway and run down the road. Old men don't do that. It's too undignified. It violates the customs of the day. I think maybe one reason he did that was because he realized he'd better get to that boy before the neighbors did. Now, we label this story the prodigal son, but there's three people involved in this story, and I want to invite you to think of this story not just as a nice Sunday school tale, and we learn about a son and the pigs and the father and the inheritance and older brother. That's the setting for what's really going on here. I invite you to consider this story relationally, not just factually. What do you mean? Here's what I mean. Remember, he read us what older son did. He's working out in the back. He hears a bunch of party noise going on. What's going on? Somebody explains to him, oh, your younger brother came back, and now Dad is throwing a party, a barbecue. It's going to be a really big party. And he was angry. He refused to go in. And the father came out and entreated. He begged him, don't do this, son. Don't be like this. Come and greet your brother. Come and eat with us. Nope. No way. Listen, I've worked for you all my life. I never even once disobeyed your commands. You never even gave me a young goat to have my own barbecue. Oh. So that I might celebrate with my friends. Wow. And then he turns his bitterness and his jealousy and his anger towards his brother. But he won't call him his brother. No. Look what he says. When this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property, not his inheritance, who devoured your property with prostitutes. Now the text didn't say that earlier. That wasn't in Jesus' story. It said he squandered his property in reckless living. We don't know exactly how he squandered it, but in the mind of the older brother, that's exactly what happened, whether it was true or not. When he came back, you killed the fattened calf for him. You see, there's three characters in this story, isn't there? There's the bad boy who ran away and wasted his inheritance that his father had spent a lifetime working hard to put together. Wasted it. There's the broken-hearted father who loves his son, who loves each of his sons. And there's the older brother who is self-righteous, critical, and hateful, contemptuous of his younger brother. Well, I've never done anything like that. I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person. I've always been a good person. I've always done what's right. And I never got any credit for it. And he hates his younger brother. And without realizing it, he hates his father for loving his younger brother. I'm not so sure that this story is really about the younger son, or the younger son and the older son. Why did Jesus tell this story? Because Jesus wanted to tell us in story form what our Father is really like. This story is about the father who had two sons. It's not about two sons who had a father. This story is about the father's relationship with his two sons. If you will, the heart of the father for his two sons. You and I tend to think of our relationship with our Father, I think, sometimes in ways like the younger son thought of his father. Particularly when we, like the younger son, go our own way and make a mess of things, disgrace our Father, disappoint him, grieve him, and we're just awash in guilt and shame. It may not be the pigs and starvation that turn us back to God. It might be something else. But the point of this is, he came back to his Father, not because he was good enough. He wasn't, and he knew it. But he came back because of the hope of who his Father was. That's what brought him back to the Father. I'm helped by a Christian writer who writes on this theme of the heart of Christ as a reflection of the heart of his Father. Let me share just a few of his thoughts that I think help us understand this story very well. He says there's two places in the Bible where we have the exact phrase, as high as the heavens are above the earth. In one of them, in Psalm 103, David prays, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love toward those who fear him." His thoughts are thoughts of love and ways of compassion that are so far beyond what we can imagine. Too often, we look at God through the lens of our imperfect human fathers. What would my father treat me like if I had done this to him? And that's how we think about God. Wow. We think small thoughts of God's heart, but he knows his heart is inviolably, expansively, invincibly set on us. The way we think about God is not the way he is. God's heart of compassion confounds our intuition about how he loves to respond to his people if they would but dump in his lap the ruin and wreckage of their lives. He isn't like you. Even the most intense of human love is but the faintest echo of heaven's cascading abundance. His heartful thoughts for you outstrip what you can even imagine. He intends to restore you into the radiant resplendence for which you were created. And that is dependent not on you keeping yourself clean, but you taking your mess to him. I was remembering this morning When my oldest son was 2 years old, he had a baby sister at home that was just a couple of months old. I had a conference 6 hours away, a pastor's conference, that I was expected to attend. And I thought, I was a new father. I loved my children, my little children. I took my boy up in the mountains, 3 months old. He was 3 months old. I drove half an hour up into the mountains, bundled him up, put him on my back, made sure he was plenty warm, and went off cross-country skiing up in the mountains for 30 minutes. Yes, you should laugh. That's crazy. The temperature was well below freezing. He was fine. Okay, I'll tell you the truth. There was 2 or 3 times when I fell down. The snow was this deep. We weren't hurt. It's like falling into a pillow. But a little bit of the snow, I had to brush out the snow, make sure he's warm again, get him back on my lap, ski back to the van, drive back to town. I don't know. My wife trusted me. Right. But anyway, I decided, you know what? He's 2 years old. I can take my boy to a conference for 2 or 3 days. That's not a problem, right? This would be a good adventure for us. We got halfway there. I remember the exact spot on the freeway where we were driving. And my boy was in the car seat right next to me. And all of a sudden, without warning, he vomited. It exploded all over the front of the car, on the windshield, on the dashboard. Oh, it was a stinking mess. Oh my goodness. Okay. Now I've been a father 2 years. I'd changed diapers. I knew how to clean things up, so that was what needed to be done. Fortunately, there was a very wide spot in the road at that point. I had plenty of room to pull the car way off the road safely. So I stopped the car. I went over. I lifted him out of the car. It was a nice day. I lifted him out of the car in his car seat. And there I am off the side of the road. I'm cleaning him up. I'm cleaning up the car seat. A state trooper comes down the road. And he sees me way off the road with a little child. And he turns on his lights and he drives up close enough to where he sees. He saw what was going on, that I was cleaning up this awful mess. I think he was a father too. He stopped about 50 feet away from me and he says, "Are you doing okay?" I said, "Yeah, I've got this. No problem. Thank you." He said, "Okay," got in his car and he drove off. So now I've got a sick 2-year-old in my car and I'm driving to a conference. But like any young man, I'm full of overconfidence. I can handle this. That night, we stayed in a dormitory, but somehow, I don't remember how it all happened. Anyway, it's dark. The lights are out. And something's going wrong with him. We're both trying to sleep. He's sleeping in the bed right next to me. And, I know what. I needed to change his diaper. Now, don't be terrified. It's possible to do in the dark if you haven't had children. It's a great experience. The funny thing was, right in the middle of changing his diaper, squirted right up into my face. That was adventure number 2. We got through that too. I got him cleaned up. I got me cleaned up. We went back to sleep. Somehow the next 2 days worked out fine. I went home. He doesn't remember any of that. He was too young. But that's what it means to be a father. And when you and I make a mess of things, we need to understand exactly what this writer said. It's not dependent on you keeping yourself clean, but on taking your mess to him. He doesn't limit himself to working with the unspoiled parts of us that remain after a lifetime of sinning. His power runs so deep that he is able to redeem the very worst parts of our past into the most radiant parts of our future. But we need to take those dark miseries to him. Now, let me tell you just a little story. this is what sparked my mind here. He says, not only does he abundantly pardon the penitent, those who turn back to him, he has determined to bring his people into a future so glorious we can hardly bring ourselves to dare hope for it. Let me explain it this way. My youngest son, I had a very different kind of experience with my youngest son a few years ago. I love him just as much as I love my other children. He finished his secondary school along with a couple years of college, and then he enlisted in the Air Force. Well, it's a good thing for him to do for a number of different reasons. He did very well in the Air Force. He won personal awards as well as group awards. When he finished, he was based on the far side of the United States from where I live. Now, if you're looking at a map of America, I live way out here. He was out near New York, 3,000 miles away. So I only got to see him maybe once or twice a year when he would come for a visit. One of the favorite things we do together, at least we used to do quite a bit, during those years, we'd go up to the mountain and go skiing together. That was one of the places where we really connected. Loved it. Anyway, he's about to get out of the Air Force after 4 years of serving very well. And about 3 or 4 weeks before he is discharged and comes home, we were talking on the phone. I said, what are you going to do when you get back? You going to go to school? Are you going to get a job? He says, no, I think I'll wait a few months for those things. I thought, oh, okay. He says, I'd like to do a little bit of travel. Now, he's 24 years old at that point, and I'm thinking, he's got no job, but he has 4 years of pay from the Air Force. He's not hurting for money, right? He's got no girlfriend or wife. He's free to go and do what he wants to do, travel, whatever, right? I know what I would do if I was 24 in those circumstances. I'd go see the world, right? He says, well, I think I'll take a little trip. And I said, well, that sounds pretty good. Where do you think you'll go? And he said, I think I'd like to go to New Zealand. Wow. I said, that's fantastic. What a great place to go. Right next to Australia. I've always wanted to go to that part of the world. Wow, that's great. How long do you think you'll stay? I think I'll just go about 10 days. Maybe 12 days. I bit my tongue because I'm thinking, dude, you have all the money you need to travel. You're free to travel. It's nice weather. You're selecting a really nice place in the world to go. If I were in your shoes, I'm thinking, I'd spend a month in New Zealand, a month in Australia, and take 6 months coming back home, visiting other countries. All I said was, why such a short time? He said, oh, I don't think I'd enjoy traveling alone very much. I said, wow, okay. Man, that sounds like a great place to go. The next thing he said made me almost fall off my chair. Remember, he's 24. He's been living away from home, away from family. He's a young man now. Young men don't hang out. In my society, in my culture, young men don't hang out with their parents a lot. Anyway, he says, well, do you want to come along? When I recovered, I said, are you serious? He said, yes. Are you serious? Yes. I had already bought my ticket to return to Nigeria on the 15th of the next month. We got our tickets 2 or 3 weeks later to leave on the 1st from Portland. Our return trip from New Zealand arrived in Portland 2 days on the 13th before my plane left for Nigeria. I had a window of opportunity that I recognized I would probably never have again in my life. That window of opportunity for me to spend time traveling with my youngest son. Vacation area, you know, my thought was this: I don't care where in the world he wants to go. I've got a little bit of money saved up in the bank. I can afford to go with him. He's got all the money. We can go. I'm going wherever he says. That's the love of a father, right? I want to be with you. I want you to be with me. Let's hang out together. Let's enjoy life together. And we went. I'm so glad we did. We didn't have long, drawn-out, heartfelt conversations, deep, conversations about issues in his life or my life. We were just together. We have the rest of our lives, at least my life, to have conversations like that. It was just being together. That's the heart of a father, and that's what that man wanted. When he sat on his front porch day after day, every evening, day after day, week after week, month after month, he wouldn't go back into that house while the sun was setting. His eyes, after a day's full work, his eyes were glued on the distance of that road, hoping and weeping with a broken heart. All I want to see is my boy. Do you feel his heart? Jesus says, that's God's heart for you. Even when you're in a far country, even when you've wasted it all, even when you made yourself a mess, even when you're reduced to the pigs, he weeps, waiting for you. And when he sees you in the distance, he pulls up his robes and he sprints down the driveway and runs down the road and gives you a bear hug. And he won't even hear half of your intended apology. He'll say, no, don't worry about that. You are my son. Welcome home. Let's throw a party. It wasn't only the younger son that was distant from the father. The older son was equally distant from the father. He thought that he could earn his father's blessing and earn his father's love and favor by being good. Oh, he was good. There was no question about that. He did what was required. He did what was expected. But his heart was just as far away from his father as his brothers. And that's why he responds the way he does. Jesus doesn't finish the story, interestingly enough. We don't know how that played out. Doesn't matter. That's not the point. He shows us two sons who were very, very distant from the father in their own way. That's only the setting for what he really wants to communicate. He wants to tell us what our Father is really like. Philip, the disciple, said, oh, you've been talking about the Father for 3 years now. Show us the Father. And Jesus goes, how can you be so dense? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. You've seen my love and compassion for people. You've seen how I feed the hungry. You've seen how I heal the sick. You've seen how I raise the dead. You've seen my heart of compassion and love for people. That's what your Father is like. And now I'm going to tell you a story about sons who were distant from their father and how their father's heart responded. There's only one thing for us to do in every situation, in every circumstance, every day of our lives, whether we're having a good day or a bad day, whether we're close to God and good, whether we're far away from God and rebellious and ignoring Him, doing our own thing. There's only one thing to do. in all those situations. Whether we've been hurt by others, whether circumstances of life have turned against us, whether we're successful, whether we're happy, whether we're healthy, whether we're sick, it doesn't make any difference. All he wants is this. There's one thing for us to do. Jesus says it in Matthew 11:28. Come to me. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? There's an old Puritan that puts it this way. That which keeps men off is that they know not Christ's mind and heart. We don't understand the way God thinks. We don't understand the way that God feels about us. The truth is, he is more glad of us than we can be of him. He that came down from heaven, as himself says in the text, to die for you will meet you more than halfway. As the prodigal's father is said to do, therefore come in unto him. If you knew his heart, you would. Go to him. Open yourself up to him. Let him love you. One of my greatest joys here in Nigeria. Two of my four children are married. I still have no American grandchildren. All my grandchildren are here. I am part of a Nigerian family by adoption. I got to know a young couple 40 years ago. We were both in seminary together in Chicago. He was a Nigerian pastor here. We became good friends. That friendship has continued for 40 years. And it's always a joy to be with him and his family. His wife died last July. I was stuck in the United States due to COVID. I could not attend the service. But Soja and Mercy were really my brother and sister, my Nigerian brother and sister. When I first met them in Chicago, their oldest son was about 5 years old. That was Wowalme. Beji was about 2 years old, and Kapimo was a baby in my arms. They had 2 more children. We have 13 grandchildren. I saw 3 of them last Sunday. They called me up. We said, let's get together. They came to where I was staying. They got out of the car. The kids got out of the car. And the younger daughter, all I did was this. And she ran into my arms and jumped, and I held her in my arms. And later on took a turn with the little boy, who's about 2 years old. That's all I want. We had a wonderful time for a couple of hours just being together. But I'm old enough now not to just have a father's heart, but to have a grandfather's heart. Any day I can hold a baby is a good day by definition. None of you are old enough to understand that. You will in a couple of decades. You see? And that's what he's saying. Go to him. Open yourself up to him. Let him love you. Whatever is crumbling all around you in your life, wherever you feel stuck, this remains unchangeable, his heart for you. His real heart, as he says, is gentle and lowly. So go to him. That place in your life where you feel most defeated, he is there. He lives there, right there, and his heart for you, not on the other side of it, but in that darkness, is gentle and lowly. Your anguish is his home. Go to him. If you knew his heart, you would. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus, his Son.